Hey everyone, and welcome to this part of the course. And in this lesson I am going to be going over depth and how to create depth using the blur filters. So when we create photo manipulations, we want to create realism in our images, as I've mentioned many times before. But a way of doing this is creating depth in our image. So we want our image to have a kind of 3D field or depth of field to it, which just enriches the image as a whole. So one way of doing that is basically just mimicking depth of field from a camera. So that would be blur in the background and then having something maybe in the foreground as well, which is blurred, just to create that the three planes of focus. So you have a background, a middle ground and a foreground. So in this image here we have this background. I've blurred it a little bit. We have our middle ground, our focus plane, which is our hero here. But then there's something missing. Well, what is that? Well, basically we just need something in the foreground. So what I did was I added in this hand here, so it looks like a fallen warrior, and I've just basically cut out the hand. I've brought it closer to the foreground by enlarging it so it looks like it's closer to us or the viewer, and then I've blurred it as well, just adding to that depth of field. And if I take the hand away, you can tell it just doesn't look as good. The hand not only creates depth of field and depth, it also adds story to the image. And again, I mentioned story early on as well. So when you're creating your images, always think about the three planes: the background, the middle ground and the foreground. And you need to make sure that you have all of them in your images. Foreground, sometimes you can get away without it, but I always feel something in the foreground just really adds to your image and enriches it. And it's very simple, like I said. So let me just go in now and show you how we can do this. And it's super simple. So in this image we're not going to have any foregrounds, but we have got some overlays here of the light kind of blending this guy in. So basically what you would do is, let's put on the original image. What I would do is, if you just wanted to create depth of field, you could just basically blur this image. But what we want to do would be, we would want to convert it to a smart filter first. Again, we've gone over this, but it just means our blur is editable at any time and adjustable when we want it to be. So just changing that to smart object now. Doesn't usually take this long. Photoshop must be having one of its off days as usual. So we have our smart filter now on our background layer. So what we want to do is go to filter, blur, Gaussian blur. Let's get it around 27.7. Click OK. And straight away we've got that feeling of depth of field just by basically blurring the background, adding a blur to it. But what also we're doing is, now we've blurred the background, our main interest, our model, is more in focus or feels more in focus, so your attention goes to him, and that's always good. But another way to do this as well is, you don't have to just blur like that to create the depth of field. You could also maybe use the blur creatively. So obviously we have our model here, he's moving forward, he's pulling out a gun. Maybe we want some kind of dynamic movement in this image. What we could do is, if I just get rid of this Gaussian blur, we could go to filter, blur and motion blur. And then the motion blur dialog box pops up. And this little dial here is the direction of the motion blur. So let's put it somewhere sideways, like so. And then let's put the distance up somewhere around. Let's have a look. So let's just come a little bit this way. And again, this playing with the dial is just a bit of trial and error. So let's do it that way. It's kind of moving up and it's kind of moving through, and press OK. So again, not only have we created depth of field this time, we've also created movement with the blur as well. And obviously it just adds something to the image. So let's just undo that. And look, that's before, and definitely it just looks quite stagnant. It's quite messy because of the background. It just doesn't look very pleasing. And then when you add the blur, it just takes it to another level. And it's very simple, like you've seen, just by basically adding blur. So let's move on to this next image. So again, another way to add blur is to create blur what has different kind of focal lengths from the background to the front, and you can use this by just using the field blur. So I've cut out this guy here and I've got this background here. So where I could add depth of field or depth to this image again is by blurring the background, but we're going to do it a different way. So let's go to filter, let's go to blur gallery, let's go to field blur. And by the way, my background is already a smart object, so it's got smart filter on, so this is going to be editable as well later on if we wanted to go back in. So this is your kind of control here. So if you move this up and down, it changes the strength of your blur like so. And it's also movable, so wherever we want to put it, that's where the blur will be. So I want to make sure, I want this sky to be more blurry than this plane here, and I want this plane here to be less blurry than the other two. So what we can do is just put that here. Let's bring it somewhere up here, and let's put quite a heavy blur on that. So somewhere like that. And then let's add a point here. And what we can do then is just pull that blur down a little bit. And then let's pin another point here, and let's just take this blur down nearly to like 2 here. Let's just put this up a little bit. Like so. So you've got the transition now, you've got the, let's even put that blur up a little bit higher, like so. And we can move this down if you want as well. Move it across. So now we have these 3 planes. We've got this very harshly blurred area of the sky and the moon. We've put another point here where we've changed the blur so it's a little bit less, and we could even make it a little bit more or less as well if we wanted to, by just pulling this dial here, and then we've got it where we've hardly any blur at all, and that just creates a nice depth of field coming down and along. And then also if you wanted to add something in the foreground, you could maybe put some tree branches kind of coming out of this side here, and then you would just blur them and enlarge it so you're getting that depth of field again by adding to the foreground. And it's super simple. Obviously you've got a couple of sliders here, so you can change like the bokeh of the light. So if you had some maybe lights in the background, maybe Christmas lights, you could pull that up to get more of a kind of a highlight or blown out effect, which can be realistic sometimes. And then you have the bokeh colour, it just changes the colour a little bit. But you don't really need to mess with these. A light bokeh you do, I wouldn't mess with the bokeh colour really. But as you can see, a really simple way of playing with depth of field. So now the blur's applied. Very quickly I'm just going to bring in a tree. Obviously it's not the correct tree for this situation, but I'm just going to quickly show you about adding them to the foreground. So we bring in the tree and it's going to be above our person like that. So what we would do is then, obviously if this is close to us in the foreground, the leaves would be a lot bigger. So you would press Ctrl T to free transform. You would then just enlarge by quite a lot. So let's make it huge like that. And then let's bring in some kind of, bring it into the corner there. You could even do it bigger. Let's even make it bigger. And then let's just somewhere like that. Again, this is very rough and very quick, but I'm just quickly showing you. And then let's add a quick colour to that to change it blue, just so it matches with the rest of the image. Somewhere like here. And again, because it's in the foreground, if an element's usually in the foreground, it's usually a little bit darker. So let's just add a curves adjustment, and let's just bring that down somewhere like here. So it's pretty dark now. And we could also desaturate that. We might as well go the whole hog here. So let's just add a hue and saturation adjustment. Let's desaturate that a little bit. And then what we want to do now is we want to turn this into a smart filter, or add a smart filter. So again, it's very adjustable. And then we want to go to filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and then we want to put quite a big blur on that because it's close to the screen, like so. And then if the placement doesn't feel right, you can always move it a little bit. So you can just put it somewhere like there. And there you go, quick and dirty way of getting depth in your image. Again, you probably want to take more time with this, and as I mentioned before, story comes into play when you're adding your foreground and background elements and even your little details. So always be aware of what your story is, so don't randomly put weird things into the foreground and blur them. Try and get things that match, and it'll make more sense. So we've gone over depth and we've gone over how to create it with blur, so let's move on to the next lesson.